watch says 7:54, so I have, that's correct. Let's take a couple questions now, and then what we can do is we can retire to the bar in there. We should be out of here by 8:15. Okay, so we got 15 minutes in this room, so let's have questions. And please keep them short so we can get to them. Question back, sir.
After 9/11, when all the planes were grounded, there was a plane that went out by the order of the president with a bunch of Saudis on it, royal family. And what is your take on the Saudi financial role in all this?
Okay.
What's your take on that?
Okay, I'll repeat the question for the benefit of you. He's asking, what's my take on the Saudi role in the 9/11 crimes, financing, etc. The 9/11 crime is very much like a Russian matryoshka doll, which is when you have a doll inside a doll inside a doll. And the Saudis are no angels, but I think that the Saudis have been played, and they have a lot of money. They support a lot of things, and they for example supported a company called P-Tech. There was a Saudi financier who supported this little enterprise software company in Quincy, Massachusetts called P-Tech. P-Tech was on all the federal computers on 9/11. It's involved in the computer crime. But P-Tech itself was being run by Michael Goff, who was working for the Israelis. He was working for Guardian later. So what we see is that it's part of the deception. You see the Saudi image. You see the Saudis being involved in financing these companies, but the companies that are being financed is Israeli run. So it's like when you open the Saudi doll, you find inside an Israeli. A very good article to read about that would be my article about P-Tech. P-Tech. Next question. Ma'am, there, please.
Yeah, the floors in the World Trade Center were all the floor trusses were filled with concrete. In the South Tower, that concrete was 8 inches thick, and that floor footprint was an acre. So when the planes hit, they hit supposedly at an angle like this. So the plane, say the South Tower, would have covered 7 floors. That means 7 times 8. That would have been 56 inches of concrete that is an acre in basically an acre of area. I cannot possibly see how a plane is going to penetrate concrete, 56 inches of concrete.
Okay.
56 inches tall that extends for an acre.
Right,
I
okay.
just don't see a plane moving that.
Yeah, right. The floors in the World Trade Center were 4 inches thick, lightweight concrete. But the thing is that when you look at the plane striking the building, the wall of the building was, as you said, they had these concrete slabs. They also had 1 foot thick, 1 foot wide metal steel columns, separated 36 inches on center. So what you had on the wall of the building was a 1 foot steel column, 2 feet of window, 1 foot of column, 2 feet of window. So basically 2/3 of the facade was glass, 1/3 was steel, and then you have those slabs, as you say. The way I look at it is that the plane, the hole was open for the fuselage. We see that. We see that the hole was open for the fuselage by that hot white hole. That allowed the fuselage to penetrate the building. What I assume the wings did, they may have been hardened on the edges, but they went into the building. They wrapped themselves around those steel things, tore some of them. But I believe that the planes were able to permeate the building in the same way that, for example, an egg goes into an egg slicer. Can we have 15 minutes until 8:15?
I'm just going to check to see if you need it.
Oh, thank you. Question there, sir.
Do you think that San Bernardino was a staged event and that we're starting to conflate domestic terrorism with this never-ending war on terror?
Yes, I think that most of these events that we've seen in the past 14 years are manufactured events. San Bernardino, for sure. I mean, we saw on the news that the eyewitnesses said that there were 3 white guys, athletically built and tall. This was on national news. And yet, the person they said did it is a small, petite Pakistani girl. How did she become a tall, white, athletically built man? 3. And the media said, how many? 3. They all saw 3. So we're being, this is another false flag event. Question there, please. Ideation is basically the projecting of the idea, putting the idea out there, whether through a movie. Well, I don't know why, but whether I don't know why they did it, but I think that they're trying to create a zeitgeist. Another movie by Arnon Milchan is called Brazil. And in Brazil, thank you. In the movie Brazil, if you've seen it, made it in 1986. This modern society where terrorism events are happening all the time. You're sitting in a restaurant like this and a bomb goes off. And then they just put up screens and let's go on. And in the movie Brazil, there's a constant war on terrorism. That's another Arnon Milchan film. It's putting out this idea out there. And the reason why I think he put it out there, because this is an idea that he knows is going to happen. He said, I'll make a movie about it. Question back there, sir.
I just want to follow on the comment from the gentleman about San Bernardino. You might have noticed that, or a lot of people may not have been aware, that there was a government vote on a UN gun ban just at the end of last year. Okay? And a number of these events, San Bernardino, Aurora, and all that stuff, all increasingly happening just prior to that vote. Fortunately, the treaty was not ratified, but the vote was very close. Okay? Just like the ISIS beheading stopped as soon as Americans funded the bombing war.
Okay, you have a question?
No, that was just
Okay.
wanted to point that out.
Okay, thank you.
Follow on
Question
that.
in the back there?
Yeah, if you'd like to, could you maybe catalog all of the types of explosives that were involved in the event? It sounds like
Okay. Yeah, well, there were some powerful explosives that went off in the center of the building that created those squibs and things. So there were cutter charges, obviously, that cut the columns. There was the evidence of nanothermite in the building, which is itself an explosive. I personally do not think that nuclear bombs were used, but it's possible, I suppose, that some sort of dirty bomb was used. We know that there were explosions going off in the basement of the North Tower before the plane even struck, based on William Rodriguez's testimony. So those towers were built to stand a long time. They were way overbuilt. So bringing them down required a lot of explosives. But we know that the nanothermite was used. The other explosives we can't say for sure, but we do know that a nanocomposite thermite was used. Question there, sir.
What happened, if anything, after the February 93 bombing, the first attack on the World Trade Center, in the foreign policy, because there was an obvious motive, right, for taking down the towers in Iraq. But what about the bombing in 93?
Well, the bombing in 93, I think that the main purpose of the bombing in 93 was to put in our mind, to condition the American public into thinking that Arabs were trying to bring down the towers. So that there was the Colonel Salem, I think his name was, from Egypt, was paid $1 million by the U.S. FBI to basically get people, into his little gang. And as we know, he was on the phone with the FBI, people from the FBI, talking about the construction of the bomb that went off. The purpose of that event was to prime the pump for us to thinking that Arabs were trying to bring down the Twin Towers. So that when the Twin Towers came down 8 years later, our mind would naturally think Arabs were behind it. That's what it was for. Question there, sir.
There was an interview on CBS.
Speak a little louder.
There was an interview on ABC or CBS, I think, with Dan Rather. He spoke to the spokesperson about being there. He said basically, it was on Tuesday, correct?
Yeah.
He said we were there on Monday, we were setting up. Can you talk a little bit about that interview with the spokesperson? And also the day before, and maybe the weeks before, what was going on, these power outages and things like that?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of things like that. There was definitely a FEMA exercise going on there, and they had moved the OEM from Building 7 to another location. So that meant that the people who should have been in the OEM on the 23rd floor of Building 7 were not there, making it available for somebody else to use. But there were a number of drills and exercises being done by the federal government. Most notably, the most important ones were the ones that involved planes, like the NORAD drills. But I can't go in. I want to tell you though that in about 10 minutes we can retire to the bar itself. And I want to let you know that if you are interested in more material about this, I have the Solving 9/11 books here. I have a few of the original articles book, and I have the main book. But we'll have to do that in the other room. Sir, Lewis, please, question.
First, I want to credit you with your extraordinary research and detail. The photos, many of them I've never, my knowledge, seen before. You connect all the dots. Secondly,
Thank you.
Ms. Jackson, you identified, and she is on record and very proud to having been the source of many of the videos of Osama bin Laden. The FBI is on record saying we and the CIA both, a number of those videos were fakes. And as you know, some of the photos of Osama are different, his nose, his ears, and so forth, and his height. She's an amazing figure. I visited her office, or what's supposed to be her office. It's Mailboxes Incorporated. It's not, it's a mail drum. That's all it is.
Thank you very much. That's a good point. Sir, please.
I'll make the pitch again for latecomers that we've got a donation bowl over there to pay for the room and all future good works of BC 9/11 group. But I wanted to say also with regards to the thermite, my understanding is from my reading that by volume of the dust, 6% of it were the little microspheres of iron. And the reason that the chips didn't show up in an analysis was they are nanoparticles rather than microparticles. And the microspheres, there's a huge difference. Also, very interesting that nanothermite creates its own oxygen and can burn underwater. And that's why in the bathtub, which was what they called the foundation of the towers, the bathtub, which was designed to prevent Hudson River water and the Bay water from getting into the foundation, they poured lakes of water in there to douse the fires, and the fires didn't go out until December 10th. So, any question about nanothermite, whether or not it was there, it was there.
Thank you. Good point. As I said, the thermitic reaction has its own oxygen. The ferrous oxide or whatever oxide you're using, the oxygen transfers to the aluminum, creates aluminum oxide. So it can go off underwater or an oxygen-starved environment as it actually was doing under the dust of the World Trade Center. Good point. Thank you. Question here, sir.
Yep. I know you had limited time, so we didn't speak. Many of us, I'm sure, know about the dancing Israelis who were filmed from New Jersey.
Right.
And we know because they appeared on Israeli TV.
Right.
We know who they are, etc. Do we know about the white van that was headed to the GW Bridge after the explosion? Have we ever heard anything about those folks?
No, I think that van was also an urban moving systems van, if I recall.
I think it was.
And this van, he's talking about the van that had basically a mural of a plane flying into the building. And there were what I called the Israeli embassy in the weeks after 9/11. And I asked them how many Israelis had been arrested in conjunction with the attacks, and they had scores of them. It was like over 200.
Yeah.
So there were a lot of Israelis who were apprehended. What really caught my attention in the very beginning was that there were two aspects of this crime that were most obviously being omitted in the mainstream media. One was the evidence of explosions at the World Trade Center. The second was the Israeli involvement. And when I saw over there on the other side of the river in New Jersey, this all happened. And these guys were arrested, and they were Israelis, and two of them were Mossad agents, and it wasn't printed in the New York papers. So I can see that there was a very intentional goal to suppress these important aspects of the crime. Well, when you're suppressing such important aspects, they must be important. And that's how when I worked for American Free Press, that's how I started picking up my stories. I would see what mainstream media was omitting and look into it, and lo and behold, every time there was a good story there.
Well, like we talked about, anthrax has been omitted.
Exactly. Another question? We have a couple more questions. Sir, please.
Well, this was a crime in which the FBI and the CIA and NORAD and the Joint Chiefs of Staff were all, in some degree, complicit. Are you suggesting that the Israelis were the ones who subverted them and made them complicit in this, or was this some sort of a team up?
I would say that the Israelis were the operational masterminds of the 9/11 events. And then people in this country, basically what you would call Sayanim, people who are Israeli supporters of the state of Israel, were willing to help. People like Julius Kroll and Larry Silverstein Michael Chertoff, I would say, is an Israeli national, by the way. He had a high management level in this crime. But these other people, many of these other people, like John Ashcroft, I would have to say, with all due respect, are basically incompetent. Incompetent in their position. And the highest level person often at these levels, like John Ashcroft, are merely kind of like window dressing. They're there to give you the impression that they're the head of the agency, when in fact the guy that's calling the shots, as we know from the quote, was Michael Chertoff. Michael Chertoff was the hands-on guy. Same thing at the CIA. The hands-on guy at the CIA was not George Tenet. It was Buzzy Kronberg. I spoke to Buzzy Kronberg. I called him up and I sent him my books, by the way, because I thought he should know what we're on about. But he was executive director, a position that no longer exists. He was in charge of day-to-day operations of the CIA. So that's how it went, basically, is that and unfortunately, the United States is not competent militarily to understand the Middle East. Maybe now they are a bit more, but we simply lack the language skills and historical understanding of the Middle East. We don't know the region. And yet, so that we rely to a great extent on Israelis telling us about Iraq or Afghanistan. And like the Israelis were very crucial in running the war in Afghanistan back in the 80s. The Israelis were the ones who gave the Americans the intelligence. And when you have that kind of relationship where when a third party is helping you to understand a place where you're going to war, that person who gives you the information has incredible power. That's kind of the way it went. But the Israelis, I would say that the Israelis are basically the operational arm of a larger group, a more powerful group, and that would be basically the Rothschilds and the large banking cartel. That comment is what got Professor Jones suspended from school. But
what about the whole nationalist faction?
The nationalists?
Cheney, Rumsfeld, the military-industrial complex. They all had something to gain.
Yeah, these people like Cheney and Bush, as I said, these people had already expressed their support for the Israeli position on the war on terror. They had signed on to this PNAC document, for example. They were prepared for regime change in the Middle East, and they were willing to go that far. And like George Bush Papa spoke at the Jerusalem conference of the Netanyahu Institute back in 1979, basically saying, yeah, we're ready to do that. We're ready to go squash terrorism in the Middle East. And then George Bush's son was empowered, said, go do it. So these people were already prepared to embrace the Israeli position, the war on terror. The war on terror, the idea of a war on terror, was already an accepted position that they were ready to embrace. That's hard to say. Question, let me see, you, ma'am, there. You.
Yeah, thank you so much for your presentation. I hope you can hear me. To understand anything that's going on in the Middle East now, I think it's absolutely critical to understand what happened in 9/11.
Yes.
And also, when I look at the New York Times in the weeks after 9/11, the pattern of unfolding events, the Patriot Act, the war in Afghanistan and Iraq, everything happens at a very the timing is just like
yes.
boom, 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 as if it was just all pre-planned.
Yes.
That's one thing. The face of it.
It was.
So obviously you're familiar with Dr. Niels Harris' work on
yes.
excellent. I just wanted to say that the fire chief gave orders to his men to go into those buildings when they were burning. Would never have done that for a minute. He thought there was any chance of structural collapse.
Right.
And then years later, Richard Gage comes along with architects and engineers for 9/11 and confirms that with forensic analysis. So my question is, when you present this evidence as a journalist, people seem to have, they don't actually deal with the evidence, they just deal with personal attacks or one way or another to weasel out of it, but they never actually deal with the facts of the case.
Right.
Is that been your...
Right. That's very true. And I would just comment that the firefighters, when they got to the 78th floor, we know from that tape, I think the South Tower, they said there are just some minor fires in here that can be taken out with one or two hoses. So it's the fires were basically extinguished in the South Tower before it collapsed. But you had on the 81st floor, you had molten iron that was literally cooking the people alive above. And it was so hot that those people chose to jump. At least 250 people jumped to their death rather than being, putting up with that incredible heat. The phone calls from people that were on the phone, they said, it's incredibly hot in here. It's hot. We're all going to die. So it was very, very hot, which is why I wanted to point out that what Judy Wood writes in her book is cannot be correct if she insists that it was a cold event. We have time for, yeah, yes. We have time for one or two quick questions, then we have to retire. Yes, sir, please.
So a quick comment and a question. A quick comment
Keep it quick.
with respect to the Israelis and Zionists. It seems like you want to kill a lot of people, especially Americans. You need religious zealots. They're willing to do that. They're willing to kill for your faith in whatever kind of weird, way that they're propagandized.
Right.
That's the comment. The question is, what do you think about the B-side, the gelatin, the supposedly art project going on?
Oh, yeah.
The students' access to the
Yeah. I think that was another well-planned red herring, because it wasn't the Austrian students who were planting these bombs in the World Trade Center. In a recent event in Florida, a man came up to me and he had been in the World Trade Center, he worked there, and he went to one of these floors that was supposed to be empty. There were quite a few floors that were empty. And he went to that floor, and Moishe's Moving guys were there. He said Moishe's Moving was all over. The trucks were always in the area in the weeks prior to, which I thought was very interesting. Moishe's Moving is a company that has their big fortress on the other side of the Holland Tunnel in Jersey. Well, he said they went to one floor, and these guys were jackhammering away at the concrete, and they were working. They were doing something on this empty floor. And he said, "What are you guys doing here?" And Moishe's Moving said, "What are you doing on this floor? Get out now. You don't belong here." Speaking obviously with an Israeli accent. And Moishe's Moving is a company I went and investigated. It's just about 2 miles away from the World Trade Center. So I believe, it's speculation on my part, but I think it's a Mossad-related company. I think that the trucks that left the World Trade Center at 3 o'clock in the morning on 9/11 didn't go very far down 995. They went through the Holland Tunnel and went into Moishe's Moving. And they parked the trucks there. So the evidence and the gold, whatever was heisted, went there. I wrote an article called The Heist in Moishe's Moving. It's a very interesting article. But that's what I think happened, is that, what was your question again?
So what's your take on the B-side, the gelatin guys?
Oh yeah, okay. So I think that the as you know, the Israeli art students who were found by the DEA, this whole DEA thing, they were, on the other hand, experts in demolition. Many of them were experts in demolition. That's in the DEA document. And they ran, one of the guys ran a whole unit of demolition experts. And I believe those were the guys who were working for Moishe's Moving, because when I was at Moishe's Moving, I speak Hebrew a little bit, and these young Israeli guys are outside Moishe's Moving, and I said, and they said, and I asked them, where are you from? And he's from Israel, cool. And I said, how'd you get a job here? He said, we were hired in Israel. And they were all like Israeli-aged guys, like age 23, 24, 25, all working at Moishe's Moving. Hordes of them, scores of them. They get the job in Israel, they come to New York, and they work for Moishe's Moving. So they were, I think the demolition experts were these characters, these Israeli art students, who were experts in demolition. They were used. They were the ones who did the dirty work inside the tower, the wiring, the placement of the charges.
Did you see the video of boxes on the wall, along the walls?
Yes.
Of that road they were all igniters.
Oh.
Somebody zoomed in on the boxes and took the number off of there, and cross-referenced the number and found out that their igniter, they're the holder, they're the plastic piece that holds the igniter to the wall.
Well, thank you very much. That's a very good comment. I didn't know that.
It's on YouTube.
Okay, but it's now 8:18, so I want to tell you that this conversation goes on, but I think we should migrate to the other. We're just facing there for us.
Chris, can I make one final comment?
Yeah, one final comment.
All right. I live 1 block north of where we are right now.
Yeah.
And I have a 3rd floor balcony. And I watched it, we all did on TV and playing it. And the idea that Connie Onshore did a 360 in a plane and brought a 737 to ground level.
Yeah.
Everyone in DC was very that, including myself.
Right.
Secondly, I heard